This is Danny Flexen here for SecondsOut. Like to be joined by Ayman Khan and for the latest edition of our Tough Talk series. And this time we're talking about, on the surface, very positive news in the reported viewing figures, pay-per-view buys for Tank Davis's victory over Ryan Garcia at the weekend. Before we get into that, what did you think of the fight?
Before we even get into that, Danny, what happened to lead reporter? Did I get demoted? What's the situation there?
What did I introduce you as?
You
General
just
Dogs
my name.
bodyguard? Oh God! See that you give them a bit of power and they become divas. Now there's going to be a rider. There's going to be blue M&Ms only in the dressing room. Sorry, lead reporter Ayman Khan, my number one guy, as Chad Gable describes Otis or Otis, for those who keep up to date with the WWE.
I'm getting that Skip Bayless energy over this side. I think that's the kind of figure I need to embody. But yeah, no. What did I think of the fight? Yeah, it's one of those fights where, and sometimes it tends to happen with these big mega clashes. I'd say that in first viewing, it's enthralling. It's a great watch because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know the direction it's going to go. But you wouldn't really watch it again because it doesn't have that real replayability factor unless you really want to get another view of the highlights or the different angles of that body shot that ended the fight. Because on first view, it looked like it was nothing. Then you got that different angle of that body shot, and you really kind of see that it did take a toll on Ryan Garcia, who took the knee to end the fight. But no, I mean, like, I suppose the kind of big thing coming from it is that we got the fight, as opposed to the fight being, it would have been great if, and I was saying in the build up to a couple of people, like, what if this was Ryan Garcia's like Diego Corrales moment? What if he like got dropped and he came back up to finish Tank? We got half of it, but we didn't get the other half. But yeah, no, look, as a fight, as it's Soul South, not the greatest, but a great event, a great spectacle, and really good that we got it over the line for boxing as a whole.
Yeah, and I saw some predictions in Fight Week and earlier than that about how it would perform on pay-per-view. You know, Tank Davis has become an established pay-per-view main event attraction, but never really hit the sort of heights that have been reported for this fight. And I think some of the predictions were around 600K would be a really good result. It seems to have doubled that. I've seen various reports ranging from 1.2 million buys to 1.4. Which presumably is predominantly US, you know, rather than, you know, over here we had it on DAZN, and in the UK it was part of a DAZN subscription. It wasn't pay-per-view in the UK. So I guess what can we learn from this? What can we take from it that will feed into generating similar numbers for fights in the future?
I don't know, because it's a little bit of a dangerous one, because you might say, and I think this is kind of an old kind of principle in boxing, is that if you really do kind of, I hate the phrase, but if you do marinate fights, eventually, if you get it right, they do kind of pay off, which seems to be the case here. Look, Michael Benson put out that this featured on the top 6 pay-per-views, all times biggest selling pay-per-views, I think it was, or at least biggest Las Vegas gate ticket sales, that being. So, and the difference between the other fights that feature on the list, I feel anyway, at least from contextually from my view or timeline of boxing, is if you take a look at some of the most recent ones on those lists, the most recent one being Canelo Golovkin 2, I feel like that was at the peak of this current boom of boxing, whereas we're now kind of in the dip. And still in that dip, we've still managed to have a major success in pay-per-view that features on a list like that. So I think what that tells me is, like, boxing can do it irrespective of what period or what point it is in terms of mainstream value. But as long as we get those fights do have to happen. And we've got it in a point where you can say that neither fighter is past their peak, or, you know, one slipped, or, you know, neither are undefeated, really. They've both been on that upwards trajectory, and they're both seen as those superstars. So when that does happen, you do get something that creates a real buzz and creates real money for everyone involved. So I think the bottom line there, I suppose, is, like, make the fights and you'll make your money. Just don't wait too long, especially in the point that we're at now, where if you do wait too long, maybe lesser fights might not make that money. You get 2 different characters, 2 different fighters. They might be at the peaks. You might not make that, or you might lose that because one loses their undefeated streak. Take a look at how we feel about Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua right now, and the perspectives we feel about those two fights. So make those fights, make them have a little bit of sell. Everyone understands and gets that, but just make those fights, and you'll get the money.
But it's not as simple, is it, as the best fighting the best? Because on one hand, they're not the two best fighters, consensus at lightweight, 135 currently. Garcia is not the best at any weight going into the fight. And then you've got the prospect, hopefully in June, of Errol Spence and Terence Crawford finally locking horns, undoubtedly. Not just the two best at the welterweight division, but two of the very best pound for pound in the world. I would be shocked if that did exceeded the pay-per-view buys that we've just seen for Tank against Garcia. So what is it outside of the quality of the fighters? And I know you said meeting at their peak. You
Yeah.
could argue that Crawford and Spence are still, close enough to their peak. How have they managed to grow their individual brands or the rivalry or both outside of, what gets done inside the ring?
I think, to be fair, we've played a little bit of part in this. Not we, as in you and I specifically, although we have played our parts. But it's media. It's media talk. Media contribute to this a lot. And whenever you speak about Gervonta Davis, you speak about Ryan Garcia. Whenever you speak about Ryan Garcia, you speak about Gervonta Davis. When we question them, those two names always cross paths. If you take a look at it now, this talk of Gervonta Davis versus Shakur Stevenson, I doubt that the amount of people questioning Gervonta Davis have also brought up Shakur's name in the same way that we brought up Ryan Garcia's name over those years. So when people watch those interviews, they know that you can be a casual fan and know that, right, the main guy that he has to fight is this guy, the one that they're all talking about. Coupled with that, the fact is these two have massive followings. I've seen it myself with Gervonta Davis whenever I've worked at Seconds Out or any other outlets. And when you title it right, when you put it right, you get the right clip, it will fly. It will really, really fly. And I think that's testament to, look, we're not on the ground over in America or Baltimore or wherever it is, but the fact of the matter is, like, you put something out there and the people that support Gervonta Davis will actually back him. That doesn't happen so much with like a fan over here in this country of maybe the same fight over the same type of ilk. I don't feel quite back him to the hilt unless you're a Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua type of figure here. That's the same to be said as Ryan Garcia, who maybe has that more of a social media kind of following, more so than Davis does. Davis is kind of, I feel has taken that Floyd Mayweather feeling from him and taken those fans and taking that baton, I think, especially when you see those two have been intrinsically linked in press conferences, and he had a bit of a sabbatical and now he's back, or was back in the ring with Gervonta Davis the other day. But I feel like those two have also built their own independent followings and have spoke about each other in those independent posts that they've made, that people have understood that these are the two that are gonna clash and you need to watch that. So I think a lot of credit has to be said to those two talking about each other as well, outside of us media speaking about them as well.
And they're both representative of kind of famous boxing demographics in terms of the support base. You've got an African American in Gervonta Davis and a Mexican American or a Latino in Ryan Garcia. And I think that plays into it, but also the fact that they both seem to have inherited the mantle of representing those communities from their mentors. You've got Floyd Mayweather for Gervonta and Oscar De La Hoya for Garcia.
And
Now,
Canelo.
and Canelo, of course, yeah, because they were training together as well.
Mm.
So that must play quite a huge part in it, because you talked about casual fans. Casual fans are well aware of De La Hoya and Mayweather, and that must have had some impact on their two proteges. So I think that it's kind of a perfect storm, but not everyone's going to be in that situation. So how do we, because we're not promoting, but how will this be replicated and generate similar figures for other fights in boxing?
You know what it is, Danny? Were you saying that kind of put me? It's a wrestling term that we use that maybe wrestling fans will get. They got the rub.
Yeah.
They got the rub, and not enough boxers get the opportunity to get the rub. You have to be literally rubbing shoulders with those greats to get that. You have to have the arm, the foot and arm around the fighter and the point to get that rub from the fighters. And the truth of the matter is, not enough of that does happen. But also the truth of the matter is, I think people will give you the rub if you have that talent. Hopkins is giving Garcia the rub because Garcia is a talent right now and has the potential to be better than what he is right now. The same to be said of Floyd Mayweather. But you look at, I won't name names, but you could pick up another fighter, let's say another Pretender prospect, and in the UK, think of whoever that is, and you think, could you picture them next to a cruiserweight great, light heavyweight great, or whatever it is? Do they think they have that talent to be associated with a fighter of that ilk? Also, as much to be said as well, a lot of people are losing a bit of their rub. If you look at, again, I won't name names, but you'll make the link yourself. You look at fighters, bona fide greats who are still fighting for money on against MMA fighters, and they're taking a lot of photos with a lot of people, but they've lost a bit of their shine because we look at them a little bit differently than how they were at one point. It kind of just has to be those intangibles of being in the right place at the right time. And I think if you replicate it too much, you actually lose that bit of magic, as opposed to and lose what we get the other day, than actually being able to kind of quantify and replicate it outside of being able to build your own platforms through social medias and TikToks and stuff. That's where you kind of you build your own platform and your own rub, really, and that's where you get your opportunities to sell from there, because you're a product, right, at the end of the day. But I actually think where we're at right now is probably the best we can wish for in terms of creating stars like a Davis or Garcia.
Yeah, we've seen this rise in recent years of kind of crossover boxing, influencer boxing, that kind of thing. And one of the things that either boxing apologists or people from the other camp often say is that if traditional boxing was able to market itself to the same degree as these usurpers, if you like, then we wouldn't have any problem. It wouldn't be a threat. Boxing has allowed itself to be overtaken by MMA for one side, and also these crossover hybrid events, because the boxers and promoters, to an extent, TV networks, are all too focused on just what goes on in the ring and not the whole other side that plays into building a boxer's profile. Does the Davis Garcia success show that perhaps they had a point? Because these are guys that have harnessed the power of the media and of social media on their own platforms as well, and they're reaping the rewards.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, but I think as well, uh, if you widen the scope a little bit, you're talking about MMA and UFC kind of taking a lot of the limelight. I think this generation of talent, or this generation, sorry, of viewers, you and I, or at least maybe I count myself, I don't know how much of an MMA or UFC fan you are. We like we like things shorter, faster, and quicker. I think there is still an argument to be said, like when in UFC you get the best fight the best and you get it quite quickly, which is great, but you lose that ability to stir the pot as much as possible. If you get it right, like I feel that they did get it right this time around with Davis and Garcia. And what UFC and MMA don't do is create gates like we've seen being put out there. And I guess that's the point and testament to boxing right now is again, if you get that right, you do get the opportunity to make that kind of money here. I feel like at the highest of highs, that's where boxing kind of will always keep its anchor and its point over those other competitions that it sees as its competitors, like UFC's. But we will vastly keep seeing less and less of these, because there isn't enough of these right now. Because, like I said to you, feeling like we've got it about as best as we can right now with the current environment in boxing. Like, eventually, I think in about 10 years' time, you'll see UFC take over these type of gates. But for now, I feel like we've just about got it right in the best means that we've got right now in boxing.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ryan Garcia specifically really harnessed the power of new media forms, TikTok being the most obvious example, and helped bring in a different demographic perhaps as well. A lot's been made of that, and how much of those translated into, tickets bought at the gate and live pay-per-view buys, we don't know for sure. But just the figure alone suggests that some of that audience did cross over. And Tank's done a bit of that as well. So I think there is an element of learning lessons, if you like, because you've got to look at guys from the generation of, you were talking about your generation liking things faster and more explosive and that kind of thing, because you've been brought up, if you like, on not just boxing, but MMA also, which wasn't really around so much in the limelight when I was a kid, or back in the black and white days. But you look at Gervonta and Garcia, and they are products of that generation. They are, Garcia is very early 20s, I believe, and Gervonta is a bit older. They'll have been brought up watching MMA and UFC and the rise to prominence of UFC, Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey and all of those sort of guys that became mega famous because of their personalities as much as their fighting styles. And I think they've been influenced by that, and they're now taking elements of that into boxing, which you would hope will be shared among their peers.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't always work. If you take a look, if I think of some of the more YouTuber, TikTok, or social media kind of savvy fighters, one of them I know that is gone off the radar a little bit. I'll have to actually, whilst I'm speaking to you, when you next speak, I'll have a little look at his box rec and stuff. But I remember Nikita Ababi. Nikita Ababi was someone who came off and had a good personality. He was seen as a top prospect. He's kind of fallen off the radar now, but he was using social media, TikTok and YouTube, and kind of flirting with these stars as well to kind of build his profile. The bottom line of it all is like you have to have that talent. You have to have the talent, and you have to keep winning, because if you don't keep winning, those doors won't open for you. You can do as much, and there is definitely a case of talking yourself into fights, which is maybe where someone like a Rolly Romero has his place in boxing and has that opportunities to do those sort of things. But it doesn't always work for you if you don't have that ability to do what you have to do in the ring. There's something like what Ryan Garcia has done. I think Ryan Garcia, because he's a good looking dude, he can talk, he's got a baby face on him. And he appeals to the big thing with Ryan Garcia, I feel, is he appeals to women. I remember the earlier fights he had, you'd listen to the roar of the crowd, and the roar would be a lot shriller because you'd have a lot more women in the crowd there. And I feel like because he's using those platforms like a TikTok, younger audiences, you get those teenagers in who see him, are attracted to him, want to see him fight, and then want to buy a ticket. He's really capitalized upon that. There aren't too many who have done that well, who've balanced winning, and the winning side comes from the Golden Boy Promotions as well. They've got a lot to say and being able to manage the right fights for Garcia up until that point as well, so he can then keep pumping out his side to keep attracting the people. So there's a little bit more interplay going on there on both halves, where it's not just, I suppose, Garcia, it's also the matchmakers and things allowing him to keep in that position where someone like Nababi, again, I'll look at his record at the moment, or in a few moments, and he hasn't been able to capitalize when he has some of the same qualities that someone like a Garcia does too.
But then, a more kind of topical comparison or a current comparison would be the fight between Devin Haney and Vasyl Lomachenko, which is taking place in June. Arguably two best lightweights in the world currently. Lomachenko had that loss to Lopez, but he's since moved up and lost, of course. So yeah, you've got the two high talent guys who keep winning. Lomachenko's lost twice as a pro, but one of those is kind of debatable early in his career. Great amateur. Haney never beaten, undisputed world champion. So based on kind of talent achievements, you would have them higher than Garcia and Davis, and Haney's still very young, and Lomachenko, you could argue, maybe isn't quite at his peak anymore. I guess we'll find out in June. So, yeah, the winning bit's important, but unless they do ridiculous numbers in June, which I don't think they will,
No.
I'm happy to be proved wrong, there is another side to it. You're not going to see Lomachenko all across social media. You're not going to see that. Devin Haney, a bit more in his case, but he's definitely not the sort of, he hasn't got the same type of charisma as a Tank. He's certainly
But
charismatic, but in a very different way.
it's also not a fight that, look, you're one of the most hardcore boxing fans or people embedded in the sport that I know. Was it ever a fight that was on your horizon, Haney and Lomachenko, as much as other fights have been?
Not this year. When it was first, like the whole email champ stuff, and what was it? Lomachenko was upgraded to franchise champion status. I don't know if they still do that anymore in the WBC. I'll have to catch up with Maurizio at some point on that. But yeah, I mean, back then maybe to an extent, because they were kind of the two standout names in the division. Haney was still was unbeaten as he is now. Lomachenko hadn't lost to Lopez at that point. So I think then, but it wasn't kind of a mouth-watering, can't wait to see it. I think back then it was still probably Spence and Crawford, which is kind of an indictment on them that it still hasn't happened. But yeah, so to an extent, but no. And I mean, Tank Garcia really did capture the imagination, not just of me, obviously, but clearly of the world. So they're obviously doing something that Lomachenko and Haney aren't. And it's not the winning, because they're both winning. And I suppose Tank's had those highlight reel KOs leading into this fight. Leo Santa Cruz, Rolly Romero. And that's done wonders for him. And same with Garcia. He's had some really eye-popping finishes as well. But Haney's looked good. You know, he's flashy. Lomachenko the same. They're exciting to watch. So I think it is that social media and harnessing the value of your own profile, and knowing where to put your own content and when, and how to manage that process. It's a level of savvy that we perhaps don't see from fighters on average across the board.
You know, I would agree with that, but I'd also say when I think and speak of Haney, the trajectory and path for Haney's like at one of his junctures would always have been Haney and Lopez, not Haney and Loma. But then but Lopez obviously fell off the rails, and Haney's kind of gone on to become undisputed. And it feels like to me that Loma's kind of been pushed and forced into that other side of the equation, which he hasn't been for so many years. And it's still a great fight. But all I'm saying to you is, from when you start that book with Haney, and when his first kind of rivalry came in, and we started speaking about his potential opponents, the top of the list isn't there anymore of the chapter that you wanted to see him write. Really, we had a great fight with Kambosos, and really, to be honest with you, a fight like sorry, no, my apologies. That's with Lopez and Kambosos, but with Haney, look, he's got that undisputed. He should have the ability now to kind of really slip over into the boxing mainstream, but it hasn't quite happened to him. And I feel like that's because the difference between Garcia and Davis and Haney and Loma, and specifically Haney in this question, because he's more of he is a native speaker of English. He struggles to sell you a ticket as much as Davis or Garcia can. That's the truth of the matter in reality is, and that's fine, because there are kind of fighters who can sell you tickets and you'll make enough money off of it. Maybe he feels like he's making enough money to not have to do that. He's at that point and he's happy with that. But what really does sell right now is, or at least on that list, Floyd Mayweather. You have to talk. If you want to get there, you have to talk. Canelo Golovkin, I think people realize this was number one and number two of the pound of many people's pound for pound rankings, or at least in that top five. So it was, for a lot of people, this was the pinnacle of boxing at that point, I guess. And they're not there right now either, in my opinion. So that's the difference. Someone like Haney will have to step up on that side if he really wants to make a lot more money, and that's a decision that he has to take on.
And Golovkin and Canelo, it should be noted, have made a lot of progress in their spoken English over the last few years. Particularly Golovkin, to be fair, he's been based in America for a long time, and they've kind of used that to sell the fights and stuff. I know, obviously, Canelo, that famous retort to Demetrius Andrade at the press conference in profane but still English, captured the imagination. But I think, yeah, there is a case of just being the best pound for pound fighter at the time, and that sells it in itself. But no one would contend going into the fight that Tank was that and that Garcia was anywhere near it. But they've harnessed the power of their profiles. The rivalry captured the imagination. They've got the endorsement of their respected elders, except for Bernard Hopkins, apparently. And yeah, it does seem to be all the elements were there, and it's going to be hard to reproduce that, but it does give me a bit of hope that boxing can, move into this generation, or move into this century rather.
Well, it seems like at least these couple of fighters are actively wanting to fight each other. I think Davis and Garcia made the first move, or put the first chess piece on the board to say, look, we're going to fight each other and we're going to be the first to do it. And we're probably going to meet later on in our careers at welterweight when we're more experienced, or even sooner. I think that's the good sign, really, that we can look forward to, is that this is happening now, not past the point of watershed for the fighters involved. So now the others will have to replicate it too. Now Devin Haney will have to step in with Lopez. Lopez will have to do whatever if he can get through Josh Taylor. Devin Haney the same with Loma, although I feel Devin Haney will fight them anyway, regardless. I think this is the last fight at the weight. So yeah, we'll see what happens there, but I think that the overriding factor, I think, is the fact that these two have actually fought, and I feel like these are the two who, again, of the crop, these are the two that will make the most money fighting each other of the rest of them. I feel I I might walk that back slightly because Haney, that might capture that demographic as well, being those two of their backgrounds, but that might be a close run thing. I probably might stick with actually Davis Garcia in my thinking there, but that's the biggest point that these two have actually fought each other.
Interesting. Now, before we round off, you had your, couple of minutes while I was talking. Did you have a look at Nikita Ababi and see what was going on?
Yeah, he hasn't fought in nearly a year.
Wow.
So maybe there's some sort of injury. But again, this is the type of person who's set. You see a lot of fighters do this. They set up a YouTube channel and they don't stick consistent with it. They don't do anything with it. And yeah, you have to say stuff like, I'm a fighter and I've got to concentrate on my training and this, that, and the other. But no, you're past that point now. You
Yeah.
can't do that anymore.
Well,
It's
get
not
someone
just
else to run it for you. That's what most people do.
yeah, get someone else to run it for you, but you've got to create that content. You've got to be that person. It's not enough to just see you hitting the bag and see you hitting the pads, and that's been done before. You have to step outside that box where Ryan Garcia was doing podcasts.
Yeah.
What other fighter is replicating doing podcasts? Dylan White's got a YouTube channel. He's dropped it a bit. He's never doing podcasts. Josh Warrington, same thing, never doing stuff. Amir Khan flirted with doing a YouTube channel. Again, nothing of that ilk. You have to make that effort. Otherwise, you're closing a door before it's even got the chance to open.
Yeah, because often, as we were saying, being talented on its own isn't necessarily enough.
Not
Just
anymore.
like you have to work hard in the gym, sometimes you have to work hard outside it as well. That's what we think anyway. We'd love to hear you guys' opinions. Let us know in the comments below what you think of Tank Davis Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia as an event, a fight, a draw. Did you pay for it? And if so, do you feel you got value for money? Why do you think it was such a amazing success? We'd love to hear from you. Give us a like and a subscribe while you're there. And we will be back with the next Tough Talk in the coming weeks. Thanks to our lead reporter.
And thanks to Danny Flexen too.